We're going to do a little bit more of a Dhamma discussion tonight, but we will also sit and do a little chanting. Um, but as we do each night, we'll begin by paying homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So thank you for joining me. Tonight I decided I wanted to celebrate a little bit. I'm celebrating that about 6 years ago, I started a study of the Pali Canon um, with a dear teacher, Venerable uh, Kemananda, Manakata Kemananda. And I went to him with some questions about meditation at the time. And I was looking for someone to help teach me better meditation. I had been doing Nembutsu style meditation, repetitive chanting of the Buddha's name, of bodhisattvas, but something was missing for me. I had been practicing Pure Land Buddhism for a while. But I never felt like I was hearing the actual words of the Buddha. Which is interesting now that I'm an active Zen novice, and I believe I can find my liberation, my enlightenment outside of the scriptures. But there is something very expedient about understanding the Buddha Vachana, or the words of the Buddha, and understanding his teachings about meditation practice, etc. So I went to this temple in Anaheim, California, and met the Venerable Kemananda. And he agreed to start sitting meditation with me as often as I wanted to come to the temple, nearly. But before we would do so, we would study the suttas, the Buddha Vachana of the Pali Canon. And we began with the Majjhima Nikaya, or the middle length discourses of the Buddha. And tonight, it's going to be a little bit long. I apologize. Of course, if nobody's watching, it doesn't really matter. But I'm going to read the very first sutta that he had me read, which is the Madhupindika Sutta, or the Honey Ball Sutta, translated as honey cake sometimes, or lump of honey, but I learned it as the Honey Ball Sutta, the Madhupindika Sutta, which is discourse number 18 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is where we began my study of the Pali Canon. So this sutta has a special place in my heart for leading me down a path of understanding, a path of study, a path of meditation, and giving me a firm foundation in the teachings of the Buddha, which then complements my study of Zen. And I relate that to me, it's very similar to the stories of Huang Po. Huang Po was one of the early Zen masters in the Chinese tradition called Chan. And students would come to him up on his mountain monastery, having practiced for many years. But they came to him to understand the one mind. They came to him to understand Zen. But they only came to him prepared. They came to him prepared with having a firm foundation in the scriptures, the sutras, in the practice. And then when they went to Huang Po, he destroyed all of that in a very Zen master way, to strike at the core of what the one mind is. So that's a whole different story. That's a whole different Dharma discussion. But in my preparation for seeking the one mind, I worked hard and read a lot and sat a lot with different monks, but a lot with Venerable Kemananda. And I owe him a great deal for helping teach me the Dhamma. So I'm going to read that tonight. So that's where we're going to go now. The Honey Ball Sutta. Okay, so here we are. Let me make sure everything's looking okay. Super. All right. So this is the Honey Ball Sutta. Thus have I heard, on one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling among the Sakyans at Kapilavatthu in the Banyan Park. Then, after dressing in the morning and taking his bowl and robe, the Blessed One entered Kapilavatthu for alms. After going for alms in Kapilavatthu and returning from an alms round, after his meal, he approached the great grove for the day's abiding. After plunging into the great grove, he sat at the root of a young bulova tree for the day's abiding. Dandapani, which means stick in hand, the Sakyan, while walking and wandering about for exercise, approached the great grove. After plunging into the great grove, he approached the young bulova tree where the Blessed One was seated. After approaching, he exchanged greetings with the Blessed One. After engaging in the customary polite speech, he stood to one side, leaning on his staff. While he was standing to one side, Dandapani the Sakyan said to the Blessed One, "What is the contemplative's doctrine? What is his declaration?" "Venerable, my doctrine is such that no one in the world, with its angels, demons, gods, contemplatives, and priests, and this generation, with its celestial and human beings, can argue with me. Such that identifications do not persist in the subconscious of a holy man, dwelling unbound by sensualities, free of doubt, with restlessness cut off, without craving for existence or non-existence. This is my doctrine. Venerable, this is my declaration." When this was said, Dandapani the Sakyan shook his head, wagged his tongue, and raised his eyebrows, wrinkling his forehead into 3 lines. Then he left, leaning on his staff. When the Blessed One emerged from the retreat in the evening, he approached the Banyan Park. After approaching, he sat on the designated seat. After sitting, the Blessed One addressed the monks. "Here, monks, after I dressed in the morning and took my bowl and robe, I entered Kapilavatthu for alms." When this was said, monks, Dandapani the Sakyan shook his head, wagged his tongue, and raised his eyebrows, wrinkling his forehead into 3 lines. Then he left, leaning on his staff. When this was said, a certain monk said to the Blessed One, "Bhante, What is the Blessed One's doctrine, such that no one in the world, with its angels, demons, gods, contemplatives, and priests, in this generation with its celestial and human beings, can argue with him? And Bhante, how do identifications not persist in the subconscious of a holy man dwelling unbound by sensualities, free of doubt, with restlessness cut off, without craving for existence or non-existence? Monk, from whatever source identification and conceptualization based on proliferation beset a man, if there is nothing there to be delighted in, welcomed and attached to, then just this is the end of subconscious tendency towards passion. Just this is the end of the subconscious tendency towards aversion. Just as this is the end of the subconscious tendency towards false perspectives. Just this is the end of the subconscious tendency towards doubt. Just this is the end of the subconscious tendency towards conceit. Just this is the end of the subconscious tendency towards the lust for existence. Just this is the end of the subconscious tendency towards ignorance. Just this is the end of the raising of cudgels, the raising of swords, dispute, conflict, contention, blame, malice, and lies. Here these harmful, unwholesome phenomena cease without remainder. This is what the Blessed One said. After saying this, the Sublime One rose from his seat and entered his dwelling. Then, not long after the Blessed One left, it occurred to those monks, Venerable, after giving this brief statement, the Blessed One rose from his seat and entered his dwelling without explaining its meaning in detail. Monk, from whatever source, these harmful, unwholesome phenomena cease without remainder. Who might explain in detail the meaning of this brief statement that the Blessed One gave without explaining its meaning in detail? Then it occurred to these monks, Venerable Mahakachana is praised and esteemed by the teacher and by wise companions in the holy life. Venerable Mahakachana is able to explain in detail the meaning of this brief statement that the Blessed One gave, without explaining its meaning in detail. Perhaps we could approach Venerable Mahakachana. After approaching him, we could ask him about this meaning, about the meaning of this. Then those monks approached Venerable Mahakachana and exchanged greetings with him. After engaging in the customary polite speech, they sat to one side. When they were seated to one side, those monks said to Venerable Mahakachana, Venerable Kachana, after giving this brief statement to us, the Blessed One rose from his seat and entered into his dwelling without explaining its meaning in detail. Monk, from whatever source, these harmful, unwholesome phenomena cease without remainder. Venerable Kachana, not long after the Blessed One left, it occurred to us, Venerables, after giving this brief statement, we could ask him about the meaning of this. Let Venerable Mahakachana explain it to us. Venerables, just like a man who needed heartwood, who was seeking heartwood, who was going in search of heartwood, was by a large tree which had heartwood, and he neglected the root and trunk, and instead thought that heartwood was to be sought for in the branches and leaves. In this way, when the Venerables were in front of the teacher, they neglected the Blessed One, and thought that I was to be asked about the meaning of this. For Venerables knowing, the Blessed One knows. Seeing, he sees. He has become vision. He has become knowledge. He has become Dhamma. He has become divine. He is the initiator and the continuer. He is the guide to the meaning. He is the giver of the deathless. He is the Dhamma master. He is the truth finder. And that was the time for this. You could have asked the Blessed One about the meaning of this. You could have remembered it according to the way that the Blessed One would have explained it to you. Certainly, Venerable Kachana, knowing, the Blessed One knows. He is the truth finder, and that was the time for this. We could have asked the Blessed One about the meaning of this. As the Blessed One would have explained it to us, we could have remembered it. However, Venerable Mahakachana is praised and esteemed by the teacher and by wise companions in the holy life. Venerable Mahakachana is able to explain in detail the meaning of this brief statement that the Blessed One gave without explaining its meaning in detail. Let Venerable Mahakachana explain it to us, if it is not burdensome. Therefore, Venerables, listen and carefully pay attention. I will speak. Yes, Venerable. These monks replied to Venerable Mahakachana. Venerable Mahakachana said this: Venerables, dependent on the existence of an I and a visible object, I consciousness arises. The combination of the three is sense contact. Because of sense contact, there is feeling. What one feels, one identifies. What one identifies, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one proliferates about. What one proliferates about, with that as its source, identification and conceptualization based on proliferation, beset a man in regard to visible objects cognizable by the eye in the past, present, and future. Venerable, when there is an ear and a sound, a nose and a fragrance, a tongue and a taste, a body and a tangible object, a mind and a mental object, mind consciousness arises. The combination of the three is contact. Because of contact, there is feeling. What one feels, one identifies. What one identifies, one thinks about. And what one thinks about, one proliferates about. What one proliferates about, with that as its source, identification and conceptualization based on proliferation, beset a man in regard to mental objects cognizable by the mind in the past, present, and future. Venerables, when there is an I, a visible object, an I consciousness, it is possible that one could point out a manifestation of sense contact. When there is a manifestation of sense contact, it is possible that one could point out feeling. When there is a manifestation of feeling, it is possible that one could point out identification. When there is a manifestation of identification, it is possible that one could point out thought. When there is a manifestation of thought, it is possible that one could point out the onset of the identification and conceptualization based on proliferation. Venerables, when there is an ear, a nose, a tongue, a body, a mind, a mental object, a mental and mind consciousness, it is possible that one could point out a manifestation of sense contact. When there is a manifestation of sense contact, it is possible that one could point out feeling. When there is a manifestation of feeling, it is possible that one could point out identification. When there is a manifestation of identification, it is possible that one could point out thought. When there is a manifestation of thought, it is possible that one could point out the onset of identification and conceptualization based on proliferation. Venerables, when there is no I, no visible object, and no I consciousness, it is impossible that one could point out a manifestation of sense contact. When there is no manifestation of sense contact, it is impossible that one could point out feeling. When there is no manifestation of feeling, it is impossible that one could point out identification. When there is no manifestation of identification, it is impossible that one could point out thought. When there is no manifestation of thought, it is impossible that one could point out the onset of identification and conceptualization based on proliferation. Venerables, when there is no ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no mental object, and no mind consciousness, it is impossible that one could point out a manifestation of sense contact. When there is no manifestation of sense contact, it is impossible that one could point out feeling. When there is no manifestation of feeling, it is impossible that one could point out identification. When there is no manifestation of identification, it is impossible that one could point out thought. When there is no manifestation of thought, it is impossible that one could point out the onset of identification and conceptualization based on proliferation. Venerables, regarding the brief statement which the Buddha gave to you, after which he rose from his seat and entered his dwelling without explaining the meaning in detail. Monk, from whatever source, these harmful, unwholesome phenomena cease without remainder. Venerables, as I understand it, this is the detailed meaning of the brief statement which the Blessed One gave. If the Venerables wish, they may approach the Blessed One and ask him about the meaning. You may remember it according to the way that the Blessed One explains it to you. Then those monks, after delighting and rejoicing in Venerable Mahakachana's speech, rose from their seats and approached the Blessed One. After approaching and paying respects to the Blessed One, they sat to one side. When they were seated to one side, those monks said to the Blessed One, Bhante, there was this brief statement which the Blessed One gave to us, after which he arose from his seat and entered his dwelling without explaining its meaning in detail. Monk, from whatever source, these harmful, unwholesome phenomena cease without remainder. Bhante, not long after the Blessed One left, it occurred to us, Venerables, after giving this brief statement, we could ask him about the meaning of this. Then, Bhante, we approached Venerable Mahakachana. After approaching, we asked him about the meaning of this. Bhante, the meaning was explained to us by Venerable Mahakachana using these methods, words, and phrases. Monks, Mahakachana is wise. Monks, Mahakachana has great wisdom. Monks, if you had asked me about the meaning of this, I would have explained it in the same way that Mahakachana explained it. That is the meaning of this. Remember it in this way. When this was said, Venerable Ananda said to the Blessed One, Bhante, just as a person who was afflicted with hunger and weakness came upon a lump of honey, wherever he tasted it, he would get a pleasant and pure taste. In the same way, Bhante, wherever a competent monk investigates with wisdom the meaning of this Dhamma discourse, he would get satisfaction. He would gain confidence of mind. Bhante, what is the name of this Dhamma discourse? Therefore, Ananda, remember this Dhamma discourse as the lump of honey discourse. This is what the Blessed One said. Satisfied, Venerable Ananda delighted in the Blessed One's speech. Now you're thinking to yourself, unless you've really studied Buddhism and the suttas, the Buddha Vachana a lot, you're thinking to yourself, what is this talking about? And I did too when I first read it. And I was a little bit befuddled. Why did Venerable Kemananda have me read this as my first real dive into the Pali Canon? And I had to think about it a long time. And to some extent, the full meaning of this didn't come to me for maybe a year or two after he had me read this and study these words. But what I learned here was the Buddha's teachings on dependent origination. And that's what the Buddha is getting here. And that's what the Buddha was teaching both this Dandapani and his monks. And that was the lesson that Venerable Mahakachana was teaching to these younger monks, was that there is a dependent origination. And this dependent origination of thought is based on all these concepts of eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, taste, touch, etc. That's the heart of the Buddha's teachings on dependent origination. And that was unique to the Buddha's teachings. And I really didn't know that at the time. So this Honey Ball Sutta plays a special role to me because learning things like these 12 elements of dependent origination, learning how the early Sangha operated, how the Buddha taught, what kinds of people came to the Buddha and asked questions. It started me down this path of really studying the writings of the Buddha, not his writings, but the recorded writings we have now of the Buddha's discourses, of his sutras. And it established in me a foundation of understanding the doctrine of Buddhism before I really understood the doctrine of Zen and the strong Taoist influences of Zen. Um, and I relate that like this. Well, let me tell you how the Korean Zen master Sung San related to this. He said, Buddhism came to China, met Taoism, they got married and had a baby and named it Zen. Chan in Chinese. And that's what it is. Chan is a union of Buddhist doctrine and Taoist cosmological philosophy that pretty much developed in that same generation of 2,500 years before the Common Era, as they began to develop. By the time it was, the time of the Buddha was about 500 years before the Common Era. And as these were coming together, these concepts and thoughts of non-self, of oneness, of one mind, all merged together into firm thought. And when they came together, they were totally compatible. The compatibility of it is hard to find when one dwells in a dualistic experience like we do in our world that we live in. And I was trapped in this is Buddhism, this is not Buddhism. How dualistic of me. And when we can learn to drop that dualism, we can understand that there's truth out there that is without boundaries. And this Madhupindika Sutta is the sutta that started me off on my teachings, that prepared me to understand these things about Zen. And I wanted to share that with you. That's my story of how I went from kind of a blind Buddhist practice of Pure Land Buddhism, chanting the names of Guanyin, Amitabha Buddha, etc., to becoming a real die-hard Theravadan, to embracing the non-dualism of Zen. And it's a miraculous development to me, not really a miracle in the sense of unexplainable magic phenomena, but that I was able to learn to let go of my dualistic thinking and accept truth wherever it was found. Zen can teach that, and I am very grateful for my Zen teachers. And I'm grateful for my Theravadan teachers who taught me the Buddha Dhamma, who taught me the Buddha Vachana. Anyway, so that was the sutta that I wanted to share with you. But the chant I want to share with you is Die Hard Zen. So we're going to chant tonight, right now. we are going to chant identity of the relative and absolute. And I really like this chant, mostly because of its strong Taoist teachings. You might even notice on the fourth line down, it says the way. That's Tao. And you'll see that a lot. Here's another one over here. If you do not see the way, that's if you do not see the Tao. Uh, this is Taoism with a little bit of a Buddhist wrapper, not very much. Uh, so anyway, we're going to chant that one tonight, and then we'll do a little sitting. Okay. So let me check my screen here, make sure it's all showing up okay. Yeah, good. So here we go. Identity of the relative and absolute. Identity of the relative and absolute. The mind of the great sage of India was intimately conveyed from west to east among human beings. Are wise men and fools, but in the way there is no northern or southern patriarch. The subtle source is clear and bright. The tributary streams flow through the darkness. To be attached to things is illusion. To encounter the absolute is not yet enlightenment. Each and all the subjective and objective spheres are related and at the same time independent, related yet working differently. Though each keeps its own place, form makes the character and appearance different. Sound distinguish comfort and discomfort. The dark makes all words one. Brightness distinguishes good and bad phrases. The four elements return to their nature as a child to its mother. Fire is hot, wind moves, water is wet, earth hard. See, ears hear, nose smells, tongue taste the salt and sour. Each is independent of the other. Cause and effect must return to the great reality. Words high and low are used relatively. Within light there is darkness, but do not try to understand that darkness. In darkness there is light, but do not look for that light. Light and darkness are a pair, like the foot before, the foot behind. In walking, each thing has its own intrinsic value and is related to everything else in function and position. Ordinary life fits the absolute as a box and its lid. The absolute works together with the relative like two arrows meeting in the air. Reading words, you should grasp the great reality. Do not judge by any standards. If you do not see the way, you do not see it. even as you walk on it. When you walk the way, it is near, it is not far. If you are deluded, you are mountains and rivers away from it. I respectfully say to those who wish to be enlightened, do not waste your time by night or day. So that is the identity of the relative and absolute. Um, and I tell you, that explains Zen. If you want to understand Zen, study that poem which we have turned into a chant. Understand the poem, understand non dualism, understand non self, and you understand the way. So, with that, we will do a little bit of silent meditation, Zen meditation, we call it. We'll do 10 minutes tonight, since we spent the last 35 minutes chanting and reading suttas together. So I invite you to listen to the bells and enjoy our 10 minutes of meditative practice together. Wonderful. Thank you very much for sitting with me. Um, as we have started doing each night, we will end our practice by reading of um, the four great vows. So let's see, I hit it somewhere. Here we go. The four great vows. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to realize it. Thank you again for practicing with me, and I hope I'll see you again soon. Good night, and again, Happy New Year. Bye-bye.